Christina?
Microsoft, an important story, and so is Bitcoin. In fact, it's our cover story this morning. This afternoon, we'll see the first of 2 Senate hearings over the 2 days looking into the promises and the risks of virtual currency as Tom digs through his pockets for some digital currency. It's not there, Tom. It's a clear signal sign that Bitcoin is no longer an internet hobby, but a real payment system that the federal government needs to better understand and potentially regulate.
There is a debate. There's a great controversy about the legitimacy of Bitcoin. Peter Cook joins us in Washington, where he knows they do not accept Bitcoin on K Street. I mean, Peter, finally
for the moment, Tom, for the moment. I mean, I'm telling you, that's what this hearing is all about. Today and tomorrow is the legitimacy, the rising legitimacy of Bitcoin. These hearings are not necessarily about Bitcoin as a threat, although that'll be discussed. This is also about Bitcoin arriving in Washington on the national stage and having policymakers take a look at it seriously. It's not just a hobby anymore. This is for folks who support Bitcoin. They see this as a real opportunity.
Well, within the hearings, is this an ultimate backgrounder for the politicians, or are they coming in with their staffs prepared with a political message about Bitcoin?
I think there's going to be the folks leading this hearing, and it's the Senate Homeland Security Committee, and the chairman, Tom Carper, the ranking Republican, Tom Coburn. Both are very familiar with this issue. They've gotten into the weeds on this, but they may be the exception to the rule here in Washington. Tom, they're members of Congress who still don't really know what the Internet's all about, so they certainly don't know what Bitcoin is. And this is going to be educational for them. This is an informational session both today and tomorrow. And again, the folks who support Bitcoin, the folks who want to make money off of Bitcoin, they see this as an opportunity. Their first entree into Washington, a coming out party of sorts, but they're going to have to deal with some law enforcement officials who are going to raise some real concerns about the relative anonymity that Bitcoin and other virtual currencies offer to criminals, the fact that it's been abused. The Silk Road example is going to come up a lot over the next 2 days. But again, all things being equal, they see this more as an opportunity than as a threat.
Peter, any sense of what the general counsel of Bitcoin will say today?
I do know that he's the general counsel of the Bitcoin Foundation. Patrick Merck is among those testifying. Again, the foundation's been formed to make the Bitcoin story in Washington and elsewhere. And he's going to make the case that, listen, there's so many opportunities here, so many upsides to Bitcoin, that Washington should be pleased, should be supporting the rise of Bitcoin, and that the issues raised by law enforcement, those can be addressed. There's no reason you can't, law enforcement can't track down the bad guys using Bitcoin just in the same way they do traditional currency.
Peter, the Chicago Fed came out on Bitcoin about a week and a half ago. What is the impact of that particular statement on today's hearings, perhaps?
Well, listen, the regulatory climate here is confusing, and that's one of the whole stories here, is that these hearings are going to help make the point that no one's entirely clear where Bitcoin falls in the regulatory scheme of things. There are about 8, 9 federal agencies that all touch Bitcoin in some sort of way, everything from Treasury to the Federal Election Commission. Yes, Tom, K Street's not taking Bitcoin, but the FEC is proposing to allow campaigns to get paid back in Bitcoin. That would be certainly precedent setting. But it's not entirely clear because it's both commodity, it's not a traditional currency as the government defines it. So that's one of the question marks: who regulates this stuff?
Peter Cook, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. Peter Cook, our chief Washington correspondent on Bitcoin. Are you pro or I don't get it.
I don't.
Joe Weisenthal of Business Insider.
I'm not on this bandwagon yet. I'm not an early adopter, though.
What do you think?
I'm with you. I don't understand it, but it feels like in 5 years, if there was some sort of economic apocalypse, there's a non-zero probability that Bitcoin might have played a role in it. The whole thing scares me.
Yeah.
Bitcoin, scary. And Bitcoin, though, is our cover story of the network today. Through coming up on In the Loop with Betty Lou, we're going to look at Bitcoin as an investment, the ultimate alternative asset, maybe when the economic apocalypse comes, as Scott Galloway says. All right, also our Twitter question of the day.
In Washington, though, Bitcoin hits the big time. Today, Congress holds its first hearing ever on the virtual currency. Lawmakers will hear from advocates as well as law enforcement on regulating this. Chief Washington correspondent Peter Cook has more on what it means for the future of the digital currency. And Peter, this hearing, is it a sign of trouble for Bitcoin?
It's not necessarily a sign of trouble. It's more a sign, Betty, that Bitcoin is no longer just some internet hobby, that it's for real. There are actually 2 Senate hearings over the next 2 days looking into both the risk posed by Bitcoin as well as the promises offered by virtual currencies like Bitcoin. The Senate Homeland Security Committee holds the first hearing this afternoon, first one ever on the Hill on Bitcoin. They're going to hear from supporters of this 5-year-old digital currency, as well as some people hoping to profit off Bitcoin, which is now trading at more than $500 a piece this morning. The witnesses include Bitcoin Foundation General Counsel Patrick Merck.
We may look back on this day and say this is the day that Bitcoin really arrived, right? It's gained its legitimacy, it's got its seat at the table. This is a payment system. The digital economy is real, and it's going to provide vast benefits and opportunities for people, not just here in the U.S., but around the world.
But lawmakers will also hear from federal law enforcement officials who will detail how criminals are abusing Bitcoin, in part because of the relative anonymity it offers them. Just last month, of course, the government shut down the Silk Road website, an Amazon-like marketplace for drugs, guns, other illicit goods, where prosecutors say some $1.2 billion in Bitcoin transactions took place. Now, it's that dark side of Bitcoin that has Washington worried about this virtual currency, but in their testimony, Betty, the law enforcement officials will also acknowledge the potential benefits from Bitcoin and make clear they have no interest at this point in shutting Bitcoin down.
Okay, so who exactly is responsible for regulating Bitcoin, Peter?
Well, it's confusing. It doesn't really fit in the normal regulatory category, so there's been confusion over that. Multiple federal agencies touch Bitcoin in some sort of way, everything from the Treasury Department to the Federal Election Commission, which is proposing right now to allow Bitcoin as payment in federal campaigns. That's how far this has gone. Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network has really taken the lead so far. FinCEN, as it's called, issued guidance back in March requiring Bitcoin administrators and exchangers to register with the government, but everyday users don't have to, at least for the moment. And Betty, the IRS is soon going to come out with its own guidance on how to treat virtual currency transactions in terms of tax purposes. That's been a question mark as well.
All right, Peter, thank you so much. Our chief Washington correspondent, Peter Cook. So Bitcoin is out there. There's no stopping it. It's being used for good and for bad, as we've heard. But is it for real, or is it just a passing fad? Well, joining me now with more perspective is Bob Rice. He's the co-founder of Tangent Capital, a merchant bank focused on alternative assets and pre-public equities. And Bob literally wrote the book on alternative assets. It's called Alternative Answer. Bob, great to see you.
Thank you.
This morning. Now, should there be caution on Bitcoin?
From what point of view? From the perspective of investors, it's a very interesting play on the future of digital currency, and a lot of venture capitalists are actually coming into the space supporting startups that do Bitcoin ATMs or Bitcoin credit cards, and are supporting the idea that Bitcoin can in fact be incorporated into normal everyday society.
But is it just a fad, as we've asked?
Look, it's a question of whether or not the VCs would say, which do you trust, the government or mathematics? With the way that Bitcoins are produced by algorithms and controlled, there's no central banker to suddenly inflate them or deflate them. And so a lot of investors look at that as like gold 2.0, and they really like it.
Well, you say who do you trust? However, regulators could mess things up for Bitcoin. I mean, are they right to be suspicious of this?
Yeah, they're very right to be very concerned. In fact, you know, the FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Group of the Treasury Department, is really taking the lead and starting to say, look, you have to register here, because the whole point of law enforcement, the way that they've been super successful against crimes and especially terrorists over the course of the last few years, has been to follow the money.
Right.
Well, if you have a truly anonymous currency, it's you can't follow the money anymore. And so FinCEN has been focused on the people who are essentially brokering transactions, just like broker-dealers in the regular world are subject to reporting and having to tell who their clients are if they're asked. They want to impose those same rules on Bitcoin dealers.
So how do you regulate this then?
Well, you don't really regulate the promulgation of Bitcoin. Anybody can choose to use, I can use bananas for money if I choose to. You can't, you know. So the question, if people want to believe in Bitcoin as a medium of exchange and a medium of accounting, they can. You can't really regulate that out of existence. What you can regulate is making sure that you know who is using it and for what purposes. Because when you take Bitcoin and you marry it with the dark web, which exists out there, the anonymous internet. That's where you get everything from child pornography to terrorists to gun running and everything else. And so that's the thing that law enforcement is really, really worried about.
Do you think, I mean, is it at a point where it can become a threat to hard currencies like the dollar, and can it be a threat to gold?
Isn't it such an interesting question? Because, of course, this would have been unthinkable before, that you could have had a digital currency with no issuing authority whatsoever, no given person responsible for anything, and have it actually adopted. But as I said a moment ago, it's all a question of whether humans want it to be adopted. And as we play more and more monetary games with things like QE, where it feels like you're just printing money out of thin air, it kind of reduces the confidence. I mean, really, what's the difference between that one piece of paper, that one token we call a dollar, and another token that we call a Bitcoin?
So just on a final note, how are these VCs, how are they investing in Bitcoin exactly?
Through startups that are trying to leverage Bitcoin into the mainstream economy. In fact, Jeremy Allaire, who started Flash very famously, has a big Bitcoin startup going right now.
All right, Bob, great to see you. Thank you so much, Bob Rice, a Bloomberg contributor and managing partner at Tangent Capital. And by the way, for more on Bitcoin, be sure to check out Market Makers at 10 a.m. Eric Schatzker and Stephanie Ruhl will be talking to Jeremy Allaire, who Bob just mentioned, the CEO of Circle Internet Financial, a payment platform. Allaire is one of the witnesses testifying today on the Hill. Today, Congress holds its first hearing ever on the virtual currency Bitcoin. Lawmakers will hear from advocates as well as law enforcement. Bloomberg correspondent Olivia Stern joins us now with more on how Bitcoin is weaving its way into the society and our economy. So tell us, for those who don't really know about Bitcoin, how the currency works.
Hey, Betty. Well, it can be hard to get your head around. And the truth is, there is no such thing as a Bitcoin, at least in the traditional sense. Plus, depending on which site you track it on, the prices vary widely. As of 9 a.m. this morning, there was a $100 gap between some of the leading sites. So what it actually is, well, it's a digital asset that lives on a public ledger. The ledger is maintained by the Bitcoin network, capital B. It's a peer-to-peer computer network, similar really to Skype. And the integrity of that ledger is maintained by complex algorithms. So, Betty, to the extent that you trust in Bitcoin, you're putting your faith in technology rather than in a central bank. What it's not is a physical entity. You'll never actually get your hands on one of the coins. There's no central monetary authority that can issue new ones, just a ledger that manages ownership, and they can't be directly transferred. Just the ownership is transferred with private keys. So that's what lawmakers are looking at regulating today, the ledger, and investors actually want that because they think if it is regulated, that will add legitimacy.
So what is standing behind Bitcoin?
Well, some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley and even some big Wall Street names, too. So, for example, Founders Fund, the group started by PayPal's founders, including Peter Thiel, they're betting on Bitcoin. Then some individual investors, such as Mike Novogratz of Fortress Investment Group. He owns personally what he calls a nice little Bitcoin position. And even the Winklevoss twins, they've just filed with the SEC to set up an investment trust. And, Betty, so far those bets do appear to be paying off. Bitcoin, regardless of where you track it, up by about 40-fold this year. That makes the S&P's 25% rise not look so good.
That could be a worry, though. All right, Olivia, thank you so much. Olivia Stearns will be back with the opening bell.